really specialize in creating experiences that are immersive and spatial.
Hey everybody, thank you for joining us and welcome to the Founders in LA podcast. I'm your host Ethan Cole, and this is an opportunity to shine the spotlight through a product lens on some of the exceptional founders we have as part of the LA community in an unedited, one-take organic conversation. Today we have Jack Gerrard and Jake Sally. Thanks so much for taking the time to come to the studio, fellas.
Thanks for having us, man.
Yeah, really happy to be here.
This is going to be a good one. But first, a word from our sponsors. Founders in LA is brought to you by Nearshore. Nearshore is a trailblazer in nearshore outsourcing and staff augmentation. With over 15 years of experience offering exceptional Latin American software development, data, product, and design talent for U.S. projects, Nearshore has revolutionized the way companies scale their teams. They stand apart with 50% female leadership, are trusted by companies large and small, and have been helping U.S. customers grow since before nearshoring was cool. Discover how Nearshore can power your tech goals and help you stay lean while scaling fast. Learn more at www.nearshore.com. That's www.nearsure.com. We're also brought to you by Unida. Unida Club is a co-working space that sets itself apart. With locations in El Segundo, Manhattan Beach, and Hermosa, Unida is where creativity flourishes. Unlike traditional offices, they provide an inspiring environment where ideas can thrive and businesses can grow. With Unida, there's no hidden fees, flexible terms, options for dedicated offices, and unlimited access to conference rooms, a photo studio, this podcast studio, plus standard 3D printers and 24/7 access to any of their locations. They're local champions who support neighborhood businesses, open their event spaces to nonprofits, and celebrate art, music, and culture. Join Unida Club and experience co-working like never before. Learn more at www.unida.com.club. Sorry, that's www.unita.club. Our guests today are Jack Gerrard, he's co-founder and CTO, and Jake Sally, CEO of Jadu AR. Could you guys give us a 30-second description of Jadu?
Sure. And I'm CEO, not CEO. So Jadu is an augmented reality game for mobile. We really specialize in creating experiences that are immersive and spatial. And, we've been working exclusively in augmented reality for the last 7 or 8 years now.
So to give folks a double click into you, what does it look like when the gaming experience is in augmented reality?
Yeah, so when you open the app, what you're going to see is your avatar in real world space wherever you are. So if I'm in my bedroom, if someone else is out on the street, you're going to see this character, and then you're actually going to see your opponent. So this is a fighting game, so think Street Fighter-esque in the real world. You're going to see your character, the opponent, and you're going to be able to get into a fight right then and there, featuring incredible visual effects, characters, and customization. There's a whole host of things you can do in the app, but really what we care about is creating a game that utilizes really the power of your smartphone.
And it's the world around you, so if you just want to have like little characters fight on the table in front of you, you can just kind of center the phone, have it figure out what the floor is, like it figures out your location by setting up like a 1 second camera image, or like how do you get set up in the game?
Yeah, Jack, you want to talk about
that?
Yeah.
So basically, one of the things that you touched on that's interesting and something we've always been a focus on is the scale of the AR we're going for. There's a few approaches you could go at it, and something that we've always thought is like the most immersive or most interesting is like closer to the life-size humanoid model, but like it's an interesting balance we always have to think about is like, okay, like we want to utilize space. So tabletop, it doesn't really encourage kind of like walking around your room or like having a whole spatial awareness. It's kind of just like targeting one little spot, while, having them too big, then you're in a small space and you can't really be moving around in the same way or like interacting with the space because it's too cramped in these environments. So like we've kind of aimed or ended up in a place of like, kind of like 13-year-old like sized
it's like
avatars.
3.5 feet basically.
Yeah.
So we do want it to be bigger than tabletop. I think tabletop, it's a whole great genre of augmented reality. For us, to Jack's point, we want to use your full space. And if you're a teenager playing the game and you're in your smaller one bedroom, like it's not really possible at true to scale. Like if you have a 6-foot avatar in that space, it looks great, really hard to move around that space. So it's a little bit of the Goldilocks zone. We want it to be bigger than tabletop. We want it to be smaller than true to scale. And that gives people a lot of flexibility in how they play.
Yeah, and to go back to your original question about what the setup looks like, currently it's a brief, like maybe 10 to 15 second scan of your floor until we recognize your floor. Then you place your avatar and you're put into a match via with a real person or like a bot of like, our tutorial setup, and soon to have a campaign sort of mode. And you're instantly just in combat, like right off the bat, just fighting. Drop you in the world real fast.
Drop you in your own world with a little avatar fighting.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
That's like, I don't know why this one comes to mind immediately, but when you talk about scale, like one day I can imagine like a augmented real life rampage, where you're like in like a New York City area, you just like create your own Donkey Kong, or Godzilla, is just like breaking apart buildings.
Yeah, it's been a long internal debate with the team. I'm honestly, I've gone back and forth on it. I've typically been the one who's more like, we should let people do whatever scale they want, like King Kong or like tabletop. I'm like very scale liberal in that regard. But it's kind of two camps that have arisen. Like, do we like turn that knob all the way up, or do we like keep it contained and have that as like you don't want to give the user all the choices. You got to make some for them. So
I think what comes with that also is, it's a new type of gameplay. People are used to a certain type of augmented reality. There's kind of like, on one hand, you've got face filters and the type of things you see on social media where it's like you're having a short form experience with the ultimate output being a video or a picture. The goal is it's a spatial experience, but the end result is still 2D media. And then on the other hand, you've got things like Pokemon Go, which is awesome, but the input for AR is really your specific location determines what's going on in the experience. And for us, we really want people to be using, yes, where they are, but really the space around them matters more than anything. And I think that really starts helping to ground it. And, it's a bit of a new play pattern for people. So as they get more familiar with it, I think that's where we get to, crank up how liberal we are in terms of what that scale and size, but giving someone kind of like a uniform experience where they can feel comfortable. They're like, great, I know my character size, I know where I am in space, I know how to navigate this space, provides a really good bedrock for a lot of that.
So a lot of our listeners are building their own, like building projects themselves, building companies themselves. Where are you guys right now in terms of the company building process, and then how are you solving these challenges? So you're saying there's internal debates. Like how are those debates arising, and then how are you coming to resolution of what path to take?
Yeah, so I'll give a sense of where we are in kind of like our particular path, and we can talk about this probably a bit more later. But Jadu as a company is on its 6th or 7th iteration in terms of like how it's scaling, what our focus is. But while we're focused on augmented reality fighting, we are post Series A, so we've completed that raise. We've been building for 2 years specifically towards the goal of the AR fighting game. We're feeling really good. We have, I think, scaled to about a size that feels pretty comfortable for us. We've really fine-tuned what a lot of our processes look like as operations. That's definitely been my day-to-day, but it's feeling pretty stable at this point, which is nice.
How many folks are there today?
So we have about a 40-person team. So it's a good mid-sized studio, I would say. It's a really interesting blend of, we're very design forward, but designers, engineers, creatives. Most of the folks we're working with have some amount of experience specifically with augmented or virtual reality. So they have a good understanding of how this type of content works spatially, which is like a completely different ball game than I would say like a traditional video game. And then in terms of how we resolve things, we like to let things cook. We're very comfortable, very iterative. So when we have these conversations, we're like, okay, like the size of the avatar, multi-month conversation. We kind of, we're actually iterating. So we're seeing what it looks like in AR, playing with that experience and kind of trying in a lot of sizes. Our CEO lives in a bigger spot, so he has some more open space. For example, I'm in like a 1-bedroom in Denver right now. Right. So for me, it's like the perfect counterpoint where you're like, okay, this is like a relatively cramped space. How does it work in all of these different types of spaces? Indoor, outdoor, small character, large character. And we usually end up finding kind of, like I was saying, this Goldilocks zone of what we think is best, especially for people where this is their first introduction to spatial gameplay. And that's really, I think, started to resonate quite well. So yeah, we go back and forth a lot on most of these things.
Yeah. I'd also say, like, you know, after having tried several iterations, these conversations, I would never say they ever fully resolve. You know, they kind of just keep going, and knowing the speed of iteration, how many iterations you put out, really, like, the weight of each decision, like, if you don't win the fight on this iteration, you might later. Like, it's like, if that doesn't work, you always have the opportunity to be like, I think that we should try it this way. And, like, being flexible and not getting tied down on, like, ideas is, like, I think a pretty key point of, like, why we're able to, like, work the way we are. Is because the second you close the book on that, the second you're, like, close to innovating it as well, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say there's no hard rules. It's we're not big on, like, hardcore dogma. It's very much everything is a flexible line.
And figure out what's working and double down on that.
What's working, double down on it. And to Jack's point, you know, even this iteration of the game is very different than what we started with. And as kind of the player interactions change, you do have to revisit some of the fundamentals of, okay, for the new kind of play style, does this form factor work? Like, we were pretty set on a slightly bigger version of the characters a few iterations back, and as the gameplay has changed, it's become a little bit more fast-paced. Scaling it down has made a lot more sense. Like, some of our heavy attacks where you're kind of hitting characters and the opponent's flying across the room, it's kind of one of those scenarios where you're like, okay, we need them to be a little bit different size to make this feel good. You know, a lot of it is feeling oriented. And that's, you know, when we're talking about a fighting game, it needs to feel high impact. It needs to get your blood pumping. So that's usually how we orient, especially when it comes to the gameplay.
I'd love to double click into, you know, the journey to this iteration. I think that's something that gets lost on, you know, like exiting founders who founded something like 10 years, you know, they started something 10 years ago and now they're exiting. For people who are building today, I'd love to learn more about, you know, how did you find the thing that started to click? You know, after, you know, sounds like multiple iterations, you found one that's, you know, it's working for you, you're building, you're growing, you're scaling. So what was it that clicked? What led you guys to identify, like, hey, this is the right move, this is the pivot that actually is the one that's going to make us grow?
Yeah, do you want to talk about, I think there's a couple, like, key problems to think about. One of them is, what device are we building for? Jack, would love for you to talk about that, and then I'll kind of touch on I think why a fighting game and why that's really meaningful. So you want to start?
Yeah, so it's kind of hard to talk about without starting from, like, the very top in that regard, right? You know, to how we worked out that mobile fighting games, what we're going for. We first had to work out, you know, what we didn't want to do. So right when we started working together, us and I, the CEO, he came to me in college and was like, hey, I got a project. I need a sound guy for it. And at the time I was a music major, sound guy. I was like, sure, let's do it. Don't know what that really entails. And he's like, we're going to Sundance. And, like, it was way before we'd ever even talked to anyone from Sundance. But, like, I was like, all right, we're going to Sundance, you know? So instantly it was just all the way in. And we got our start really with the Microsoft HoloLens. With the Microsoft HoloLens 1, we were experimenting with DepthKit, which is a New York-based startup who were doing volumetric video capture with the Xbox Kinect. And so what we originally started off doing was documentary content in AR using a combination of volumetrics and headsets. So you could basically, kind of like in this context, you could put somebody with the headset, like put the HoloLens on them, and then place a hologram in the room with them. So I would be sitting down talking to a holographic version of you, which we'd cut up these videos into essentially a branching narrative format. So it was an interactive 3D interview simulation, which turned into our first project, Terminal 3, which was a political piece about Muslim perceived identities being stopped at airport screenings, and it was taken to Tribeca Film Festival with the help of Jake Sally, our producer at the time. But before he was on our team, he was working with Verizon on mixed reality projects. So that went really well. And and we used it to go into our next project, which was the Jester's Tale, which was sort of a criticism on AI and like its perception as like a thing with agency, which ended up, that one did go to Sundance. The dream was finally realized after 2 hard years of work. We were still in college, coming out, and that also went really well. But like the interesting thing about Terminal 3 and A Jester's Tale was that we had gotten to the top of like what that headset based stuff was at the time, right? Like we had gone to all of the big festivals, we had raised the big money from companies, and like we had like made the project. But then after that, there was no real market adoption for these because of just the amount of people who have AR headsets at the time. Things like the HoloLens, things like the Magic Leap weren't really consumer like used products yet. They weren't in the market. There wasn't enough appeal. So at that point, coming out of those 2 projects, we decided like, okay, like if we keep doing this, we're going to continually be just like living project to project, raising money to get to the next project. And then like until we're just waiting around for the market to be ready for us. So kind of this realization moment somewhere in that time of like, there is a very capable AR device that everyone in America and beyond that, the rest of the world, like smartphones in general as an AR device, are highly underutilized, and the capabilities of them even now are still like not fully recognized. So like while we're waiting for the headset thing, was our approach at the time, like let's start working on mobile stuff. And just that idea over time has just continued to prove itself true, is like these software companies keep developing these smartphones that keep getting stronger and better to the point where like my smartphone's now is as strong as the computer we made like these headsets on in a lot of ways. So pivoting into the mobile market, we kept the AR and the volumetric through line. We started working with another company who were doing more high def volumetrics. We were like, the thing about the depth kit volumetrics were they're essentially, you can't go around them in the same way. So to be able to give it to like, they capture from the front back unless you configure a few of them. So the company we started working with, Metastage, were doing bigger captures, and we were able to capture much more high definition things. And at the time we were really looking to like, okay, there's this big market happening with TikTok. It was right at the start of all that. And like Instagram is doing a thing with face filters, TikTok's coming up, and really trying to essentially create this platform, Jadu, which is at the time when we came up with the name. And it was essentially a platform where we would go and work with artists, musical or otherwise, and get volumetric captures of them to place in your space and like shoot promotional content or anything the artist might desire, little music clips of holograms of the artist for sharing in social media, so that kids could go and place them in their space and be like, oh, look, I just did a skit with Lil Nas X, or I just did a skit with the Lil House Phone, a ton of artists. We had a wide range of people there. And after a while of doing that, just we hit another point where it was essentially like the form factor of like you can't interact with it in the same way. Like it's not immersive. Like it's fun, it's like cool, and it's like a gimmick, and not like a gimmick, but like it's has novelty to it, right? But the amount of time you actually want to be doing that for was not what we were looking for in terms of, like the scale of AR we want to achieve, right? Like growing up reading like Snow Crash and like, thinking of all these metaverse things and being like, we're pivoted into a place where we can really like actually like push AR forward as a medium. It became apparent that we need to do something more interactive, and with that, I'll alley-oop to you.
Inaccessible, right? So it sounds like part of it is taking the technology started in a niche space that, the latest technology and the HoloLens with, at the time, a lot of promise, like, oh, people will start using these headsets. I think it was similar to when Google had like first launched Google Glass too. So it was kind of competing things in a marketplace. It felt like this might be where things go. Taking that probably further than most people could have possibly taken it if you actually made projects, got funding, and took it to Sundance. That's Probably like in terms of like the HoloLens achievements, it's probably high, probably their Hall of Fame somewhere.
Yeah.
But then recognizing that, hey, that medium's not the right one. It's just not accessible enough for us to be able to do what we want to do. And these phones that everyone's walking around are actually powerful enough to provide this experience that we want to share with them. And Jake.
Oh, yeah. I mean, the ubiquity of the devices, I really want to double down on what Jack was saying about, we'd shown these at these festivals. We had museum installations of a lot of our work that were pretty elaborate. And we were like, great, okay, we've reached this level of achievement. Where can it go next? And we were hitting a real ceiling on it. And we were like, we've shown the 10,000 people in the world who care about this format and go to all of these things. It doesn't scale any bigger, and as a business, that's a problem. So for us, we ended up going in the mobile direction. The early iteration of Jadu, where we were doing the holograms in people's physical spaces, and really you're like, hey, you can stunt cast Lil Nas X in your room. People love this. But to Jack's point, it's like there's technical limitations in what you can do with the volumetrics and the holograms. That was, I think, also limiting. And what we were starting to see is that people themselves wanted to, I think, enter these spaces and enter other people's spaces. The framework, I think, for the fighting game is like, on one hand, we want this to be something that utilizes avatars in real world space. So taking the hologram concept of people and transmuting it into avatars, something that you control, that you can manipulate, having it be third person. So most augmented reality experiences are first-person experiences. When you see the hologram, when we were doing our headset work, you are embodying a character and you're interacting with these holograms. For us, this transition, which is pretty non-standard for AR, of actually having it be third-person, it opens this other access of interaction where it's like, I can physically move around with my device, and I can move my character around. And now you've got two opportunities to move in a spatial way that's really, really nice. It opens up so much more flexibility for the players. So you're like, okay, now we have this much more open space. I can move around, my avatar can move around. What do we want those characters to be doing? And I think AR is still very novel, especially spatial AR, that we want it to be something that's quick, it's easy to understand, you know exactly what you're doing. Getting fights are super straightforward. You're like, it's me, it's someone else. It works really well for like the constraints of mobile, which is it's harder to have like 7, 10, 20, characters in a space together. So let's keep it constrained to 2 characters doing something in a spatial construct. What could that be? Fighting's very natural. It works well with kind of like the mobile game market itself. And it's something that we feel like we can build on and iterate quite quickly. It also looks great on social media, which for us is, a lot of people also, I think one of the other big things we landed on, at least for now, is vertical versus horizontal. We don't do landscape mode with Jadu because we want people to be recording their videos in a format that's native to how people consume social media. So that was a huge switch. Also, when people are holding things in landscape mode, their hands are often over the cameras and sensors. You need to make AR work well.
Oh, that's interesting.
If you also think about how much, like when you're holding it vertically versus horizontally, how much actual screen space your thumbs are taking up relative to the screen. Horizontally, you're going to have your palms resting on either end. Like Jake said, you might be covering the camera, and then you're looking at essentially a square between your 2 thumbs. While vertically, you get probably about 3/4 of the screen and like hold it with one hand. There's a lot of these kind of ergonomic decisions that end up affecting product decisions later, just for the sake of the experience. It's kind of an interesting one. The idea of a fight in AR too, I think it's really good at, you think about these action movies where like the coolest fight scenes are like, oh, they're spiral. Look, they're off a bridge. Got thrown into a lamp. There goes your lamp, and something that can be done there is like, there's a lot of interesting spatial interactions that just come from the nature of like, I don't know, like a tavern fight in like a fantasy movie, or like a cowboy scene, something like that.
It's also a lot of AR right now. It's very like polished pastel. It's designed to be something that's a little bit more calming and aesthetic, maybe a little bit creative. But I think what's missing is content that's reflective of kind of like the chaos and fun of the internet. And we are, we're an independent company, so we have that flexibility to say like, yeah, let's go a little crazier with it. Let's get a little bit more ruckus with it. And we really like that. And I think people really respond to that. If they're like, look, we love things like Pokemon Go. We love the face filters, but we want something that has, gets your adrenaline pumping.
That's fun. I can almost picture a version of it down the line where it's like, yeah, you're like, you have your phone, they're fighting, and like in this little world in your phone, like they break your window as the guys are fighting. Like that's ridiculous, but it'd be fun. It'd be ridiculous to the user, but I think there's room for you guys to build to that. I mean, it feels like the way that I guess we got the CTO sitting right here. Like, is that something that could happen in a future roadmap, years down the line, where it's not just the characters that are there interacting with each other, but they're actually modifying your world through the window of your phone.
Yeah, so it's funny you say that. We've actually had iterations and we've used a lot of those kind of similar, like wall breaking in particular is one that it's great. That's the money shot. Like things coming out of your wall, breaking into your wall. Like it's like the technology is far enough along where object recognition's pretty good to a point where like your phone knows what a window is, it knows what a table is, it knows what a chair is. It can't, the AR software itself can't tell you like the difference between like a dog and a cat by any means, but like big macro objects that usually fall within a similar range are easily recognized and something that we play with a lot. And like when we talk about kind of the innovation, the medium not being used to its full hardware extent right now is something that a lot of the AR experiences you see are missing. Like if you think about like the number one AR game right now, Pokemon Go, like they're not like their main iteration that like got them really big like wasn't even actually truly using AR in any kind of meaningful capacity. It was just like a video overlay to a degree, and like now they've come a little further along, but still like the full capability of like what's actually going on behind the scenes of like how this software is currently working and set up. I think a lot of people don't realize how far along it's come just because none of the consumer facing products are really starting to think in that direction. So it's something that we think about.
And pushing it. I think you were touching on this a little bit, which is just like, I think it's a lot of relationships. It's like your relationship with your phone, your relationship with your character, and then those character and that phone redefining your relationship with your space. Like that space is a bedroom. You're like, cool, I hang out in here, I watch TikTok in here, I sleep in here. Suddenly now it's kind of redefined what that space can be. We're like, oh, I can be in the middle of a brawl in here. I can have, depending on what I do with my avatar, it's going to directly impact what my space looks like, feels like, sounds like. And we think that's like a really interesting kernel of just like player behavior that we want to be leaning in on and really helping people open the aperture of their mind of like what your phone is capable of. Like it's capable of so much and it's really underutilized.
I can't help but think of, you mentioned 13-year-olds are kind of like a range, or not, probably like 14 or 15-year-olds, people around that age would be an ideal customer or potential customer. And that's definitely an age where, one, you're probably in your bedroom more than you want to be, and two, like, you probably want to be somewhere else. And so the ability to take this person who wants to be somewhere else but it's stuck in a location and giving them the option and opportunity to modify it is in a way like, I don't know, therapeutic for them. It's like, I never thought I'd be saying, oh yeah, the AR fighting game could really be therapeutic, but it does. Yeah. I bet that there's a lot there to that, where these folks who are stuck in this room feeling this angst, they'd love to be able to just like
uppercutting someone into your wall feels great.
And it's funny because that exact thing you're talking about actually led to one of our other big product decisions, which was the form of AR multiplayer we were going for. When you think, if you know much about AR, when you think about AR multiplayer, the first thing that you probably think of, I say because it's the first thing we thought of, and is two people in the same room looking at the same thing on both of their devices, right? Like we place an avatar here, and then when we both pull out our phones, we are looking at the same object on both of our devices. And there are several companies that are working towards this direction. There are demos out there that exist that like simulate this, but The less low-hanging fruit that took us a while to come to was the idea of like, okay, what about two people in two different spaces meeting up in AR, right? So like, what does it mean? Like, if I'm in my room, I don't want to leave the house. Jake's in his room, like in Denver. He doesn't want to leave the house, but we both want to interact with each other in AR. What does that look like? So after, like trying several things, what we landed on was like, okay, like, how do we make these two people's spaces combined into a way where like both of them in their own isolated environment are having a uniquely enjoyable augmented reality fight, taking elements of their room and space. What are we translating to the person across in Denver? What are we keeping for that person in Denver? And really like innovating on that idea. And I think still to this day, we're the only company who's really doing that in this capacity of like essentially
third-person remote multiplayer.
Yeah. So.
You guys mentioned, the team, and I guess going through multiple iterations. How do you look at building the team, especially in the earliest stages of this iteration of the company?
Mm-hmm. So it's pretty interesting. Like the earliest iterations of the company, we just had in college. It was all just kind of, like when we were working in the studio days of like film festivals. It was really just like our friends from college. And after that kind of stage boiled down, left college, and like we were all kind of going to start. Me and Usid and I were the only two like remaining members. We ended up working with another friend from college who became one of the founding members, Julia. And from there, the team kind of just started to build itself. It was pretty interesting. Like we didn't have enough money to really be posting job listings or anything, putting out any kind of resumes. But our first like 4 or 5 members were people who found us out of interest, right? Like our first engineer, Olivia, was like a friend of a friend who like knew what we were doing and was like, hey, you should hit up these guys, and hit us up. And we're like, oh yeah, you want to work for us? Like we don't have money, but like you can work for us for free. And it was like, sweet, I'm coming on, and then we had one of our next developers, Usama. He was just a user of the app who like DM'd us on Instagram being like, hey, like I found this bug in your app. I know how to fix it. You mind if I like help you out? And we're like, yeah, come on. Like, you want a job? Like, yeah, sure. Like, come here. And then, like Sam, another one of our engineers, he was one of the hologram artists we were working with at the time, Poppy. He was like huge fan of this artist, like found us through like our app. And then similarly, he just cold emailed being like, hey, I'm graduating, like, will you, like, give me an internship? And we're like, yeah, like, like, we've been doing this for a year. We've never had a job. Like, an internship is, like, all we are. Like, we're all executives and interns at the same time, So it's kind of really, up until, even after, like, that iteration when we raised our first, like, our seed round of funding, like, we didn't have to look for anyone. Then we got people like we'd already been working with peripherally for a while who like we were like, all right, as soon as we have money to pay these people, like we're gonna get them, because at the time it was just kind of like our original founding like engineering team and first few members were like, who's gonna work for free, like and like who's into it, and then we got to a point where we're like, now we can like have these people, and then only until after the next stage did we really have to start.
Yeah, I think a lot of it, like, there's this real passion gravity well that brought everyone together in this first stage. So again, there aren't a lot of people building AR, and I think that makes it a lot easier because the pool of people that are have to be excited about it, and then they just have to really want it and have any amount of experience. It's a small pool of people, and since then, yeah, it's transitioned a little bit, but it's still, I think, fundamentally is like people who are working here really are interested in augmented reality as a medium and the different ways that it can be used, like I was saying, to like redefine relationships with spaces and characters and people. And those all start to really factor in, and just kind of, that aha moment that, I'm coming out of it from like a VR side, that moment where it's like, oh, what? Like, you can do this? we love giving people that. And I think it's something, especially as we kind of continue to build out and now iterate on a product that we have that's getting better and better versus a project that we take and then throw away and then do another one. The depth of that experience, the density of it can start to get really, really high.
I think what's incredible about this story is that you were able in the early days to build a community, or you build, excitement around it such that, people are like, hey, can I work for you for free? Of course, yeah, we're all working for free right now. But like, how do you think you got to that point? Like, you mentioned, right now the product is built around social media. Did you start, like, how did you build that community so much that those early adopters, those early engineers knew who you were enough to say, yes, I like this, I want to join?
Yeah, I mean, I will say it's built around augmented reality, but we're realistic, which is the world, the underlying layer of the world is social media, so it's optimized for sure for social media.
Yeah. I'd say, like, going into that, there are a few factors, one of which is our CEO is an absolute beast, and, like, he kills it at that. But, like, to Jake's point earlier is, like, when we were at the festival stage and, like, there's only these select few people who have this, like, weird niche piece of hardware, like, the only outlet for a lot of this actually ends up being, like, the media and, like, the community you build around it and the, like, hype you generate, because that, like, okay, like, only a handful of people are going to get to see this at this film event. Like, how are we going to make this worth it? And ultimately it has to be, like, if people can see, like, where the technology's going and, like, what it's going to be, that's, like, the most success you can ask for on something like this, is, like, get people excited about not just the hardware or, like, the thing, but, like, the concept of AR as a whole. Like Jake said, AR is the heart of our company. And at where we were at the time, we had to get really good at making this something that everyone could participate in, not just the people at this thing with this hardware.
I think you guys were also doing a good job when I first got introduced to the earliest version of the team. Is a lot of the teams that were making augmented reality were like, hey, we're going to place, like, an object in your space, and, like, that's an AR experience. And then these college kids come along, they're like, hey, we're going to do, like, the absolute most complicated version of asset creation, volumetric capture, all of these different cameras. We're going to cut all of those up. I mean, the file sizes of these experiences were, like, tens of gigabytes.
Yeah.
And we're going to, that's not enough. Then we're going to make it an interactive, branching narrative, voice-powered experience. Like, the layers and how far it's getting pushed beyond what's normal was, I think, what blew my mind, especially on the initial push, and, like, just the raw energy of it's AR. This was peak VR hype cycle too.
Right.
And even in the face of that, when it would have been so much easier to lean in on VR, there was a real dedication to augmented reality and making sure that this does connect with your real world, because there isn't an escapism to it. It's designed to recontextualize what you already know in a new way. And people, it resonates with people.
Do you think it helped that you were building, it sounds like you guys went, like, just a mile deep into it, right? Do you think it helped that you were doing that as students so that you were able to dedicate the time to it without, with a minimal distraction?
It's interesting. Maybe a little bit, but at the time we were starting on our first project, like, us and I were still, like, mid-finals, and, like, we were like, yo, like, can we, like, have this class off to go? And, like, I almost failed out of college just, like, pursuing this thing, because, like, I ended up in this point my senior year when, like, all of my teachers were being like, we know you have this big thing going on, but, like, you need to show up to class or we're going to fail you. I'm like, look, I'm in college so that I have the skills to do the thing I want to do. And here I am doing the thing I want to do, and you're telling me, come back to college, I'm not skilled enough to do it yet. So I kind of hit this point, and, like, the faculty of my college ended up kind of, like, getting it and coming around, like, giving me a lot of just, like, all right, you can pass. But, it's like, there's never going to be the time where you actually can sink in those hours if you don't make the time. Even when we first, like, came to LA after we had done, we're like, we're not doing film festivals anymore. We had no money, we had no funding, but like I was Postmates driving every night so that I could like have enough money to live while trying to get this thing going during the day. And I was like, there was that temptation of like, oh, just get a full-time job and let this be the thing you're doing in the evenings. You know, it's like this, you can like meet up with us at after work and then like maybe like mess around. And it was kind of like, no, like this is going to be the main thing or it's not going to happen. You really have to like go at it with that mentality, you know?
How long did you do the Postmates thing?
That was probably like a good like 4 months. That was a good 4 months of when we first got here. Then we picked up, we ended up working with Jake and Verizon again. Jake came to us that time.
Yeah, Verizon was they had these 5G educational classrooms all throughout the country, and they're like, hey, we want middle school students to have fun, innovative experiences. And I was like, what better narrative is there than, you know, recent college graduates making innovative experiences for the next generation? Like it sold itself. Also, no one else could, I think, do it at the scale and at the speed and at the quality that we were looking for, where it's like, look, I don't want middle schoolers to have like tap to place an object. I want them to have like a much more rich experience. So yeah, of course, came to the team, made a ton of sense, and they absolutely crushed it. Did 2 experiences for them, and students loved it. Yeah, those were really, really fun projects.
I'm curious, and one of the things we ask about is early customers, and I think you had very early customers, but did you keep the same company name through those iterations? And you keep the same social accounts? So did that kind of build on top of each other, or did you start fresh when you went to the latest iteration with your social accounts, I guess, specifically?
Yeah, so we did change names and stuff. We were originally a studio, or we are framing ourselves as a studio, and our name was OneRic, OneRIC. And that was when we were more in the festival days. And actually with OneRic was when we first started working on Jadu, the volumetric hologram app as it was at the time. That was our app that we were calling Jadu. And it was kind of at the same time we were doing these education initiatives. We were kind of like, okay, this studio like has these 2 projects, Aurelia and Career Day, and then we also have our app Jadu. And just during that cycle, realizing and like coming to the terms of like, oh, this is actually like, you know, the thing. We changed the name to Jadu. We did keep socials, I believe. Like I haven't opened a social media account in years, so I wouldn't know. But I assume we kept the same followers and everything, changed our social names. But we did we like left the OneRic stuff behind. We didn't like repurpose like the website or like the idea of OneRic, but we used that moment to be like, all right, that was then, now we are Jadu, and we are an AR company. We're not an AR studio, and we are focusing on this product. This is our flagship, and use that moment to kind of like wash the hands of the past almost, and like be like, if you were with us then, you're still with us now, but we're doing a new thing.
Yeah, no, yeah. I mean, that's super important. Even if you rebrand, this is a lesson I've seen from a couple companies. Even if you rebrand, you don't want to lose the community you've already built. Even if you small pivot, or even if you change the name, like, you know, you can often rename the social media account to something new, but don't start brand new at zero, because you're doing yourself a disservice, and you're losing the people who already trust you and believe in you. So that's awesome. So Grounded is back in LA. We love to ask on this podcast, you know, what was your most LA moment? It sounds like you guys might have a good one, having been at Sundance and been a little bit around the industry.
Do you want to go, or do you want me to?
You go first. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I'll give two quick ones. One, I started my career on the talent agency side. So my first week of work in LA, I'm living 3 people in a 1-bedroom. I'm, barely making ends meet. And to get into the office, you like go up this elevator, and the elevator ride on Monday was in an elevator with Snoop Dogg. The elevator on Thursday was with Drake, and it was kind of like, oh, this proximity to talent is like staggering.
This is real.
But I think my favorite one, honestly, is I held off for like 2 years, but eventually my now wife and I, we were like, okay, let's do a juice cleanse. Let's just do it. We're gonna do it. We get all the ingredients over the weekend. We're like, our grocery bill is like triple what it would normally be. We get like the nice blender and everything. Monday morning, great juice, love it. Monday afternoon, loving the juice. About Monday afternoon, I'm like basically seeing stars. I call my wife. I'm like, I don't know if I can do this for a full week. She's like, oh, I already ordered a pizza. You should come home. And I was like, great, let's do it. So I think I've never really gotten onto any of the dietary trends that LA offers, but I tried my damnedest.
I love that you held off for 2 years. That's a very LA thing to like, all right, I succumbed to it, but I did hold off for 2 years
I'm
before
from Colorado.
I forced myself to
we
do the
just
cleanse.
go outside.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
I think mine would have to be, it was like probably like right after we had started working on Jadu 1, like, we had started just kind of getting into the LA music scene, like working with a lot of these artists in like, kind of the all new rock kind of areas and hyper pop and things like that. And we worked with this one artist, or this one band, Palais Royale, who and their guitarist Sebastian ended up inviting me and Usid to one of his parties, and we were like, oh man, like, hell yeah, dude. Like, and so we went, and like, he's one of my best friends now, but just like that moment of going to like this big rock star Airbnb, and just like, I was like just looking at us and like giggling, like, dude, like, like, look at us. And he was just like, stop it, man. Like, but no, it was pretty cool moment. And like, just like over time, just like, learning like, oh man, like everyone who's like in it, and you just kind of like see through like the phone and like see on social media, and just realizing like that's so curated, and really everyone's pretty, similar. And like, there is this weird taking of just people in general off the pedestal that happens when you're like just around it, I guess, to a good amount. And like, you're like, oh, like there is the difference between me and anyone is not that big, is such
It's
a
funny.
trip.
Yeah, I hear that too. Like, I think what people forget is like when they see people on TV, like how much production is around that like, yeah, there's like full teams of wardrobe and makeup and hair, and so for women who are just walking around like don't understand that, like, yeah, they would look a lot like those women too if they had amount of teams and production around what those people on TV. So it's not fair to compare yourself to someone on TV, because like that's not what they're really like. They're more often like us. And
it's LA. I mean, it's the guys, it's everyone. I think it's the dogs. Everyone everyone is looking their best self. Yeah, it's a humbling experience for sure.
And the athletes. A friend of mine has a daughter, and she's in a soccer league, and like Mia Hamm and Nomar Garcia Perez's kid is in that league, and she's just like scoring 10 goals a game. It's just sometimes how LA just attracts you, that type of person. Well, thank you so much for joining us, guys. This was really fun. We're speaking with Jack Gerrard and Jake Sally, of Jadu AR. And where can folks find Jadu?
Online or on the App Store, you can download our app. It's Jadu Fightin' AR, or online at https://jadu.ar.
And JADU.
That's JADU.AR.
Yeah.
Like.
Awesome. Well, I'd like to thank our sponsors again, Nearshore, Unida, and ProdHub.ai. You can build better products with ProdHub.ai, where innovation meets efficiency. Automate your PRDs, fast-track story creation, and speed up your product team with a single platform. It's your co-pilot for product management. Discover how at prodhub.ai. That's PRODHUB.ai. I'd like to thank you again for listening to us. If you like what you hear, please smash that subscribe button. Thanks again for joining us, and we'll catch you next time on Founders in LA.